Hey everyone, what's going on? I'm Tristan and welcome back to the Tris-Tan Podcast. Today we have Tom with us again. It's great to have you back, Tom.
Yep, it is great to be back. Great to be here doing another episode with Tristan. And just as it was before, it's always an honor.
And it's an honor to have you. For today's episode, we're going to be delving into some deeper topics, more controversial in our society. And those are going to be cancel culture, censorship, hate speech, and freedom of speech, all of which I guess you can link to one another in some way or another. So that's why I've sort of tied them all in together. But before we kick into that, Tom, I'm going to ask some questions that we'll both answer. A couple of just get to know you, a couple of hypothetical. Yeah. First one, what are you studying at the moment in uni?
I am currently studying a Bachelor of Arts, majoring in sociology, and hopefully that will allow me to start postgrad studies in a year's time.
Yep. I'm studying Bachelor of Primary Education, and hopefully that will lead me to teaching. um, yeah. What is your favorite color?
My favorite color. This kind of changes depending on my mood and the day, but I've got to go with silver. There's just a nice sort of regal, refined element to it. Especially silver juxtaposed with white is a very nice a very nice pairing. Very nice pairing of color.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me it's purple takes it by far. Probably like the purple color that's like at the top of your video camera,
Yeah,
sort of the
yeah,
purple I'd go for. Just it's a nice soothing color, I guess. Also, I
fair
like
enough.
sort of the deeper meaning you can get out of it in terms of like the balance between blue and red, which is like sort of can be
Mm,
viewed as good and bad. I don't know. That's
yeah.
just the law of purple. um, yeah. Next question. If you could learn a language instantly, which one would you choose and why?
There's a couple languages that I'd want to take, but if it was just one, I'd have to say Mandarin because there's just so many people that speak Mandarin, and I think that it would help me to better communicate with them. It would sort of allow me to be able to interact with more people, to understand more people, and I think that would be really beneficial.
Mm. Yeah, that definitely would be helpful. For me, originally, I was honestly gonna say Japanese because anime. But I think I've sort of changed my mind and just I would go with Arabic just because then I'd be able to understand all my sort of family members, and especially like grandparents who would predominantly speak Arabic. And
Right.
also I would never tell my parents that I could understand it because they usually like to talk Arabic in front of us when they try and talk about secrets. So could use it for some intel.
That would be
Nah.
smart.
Last question. If you could only have one food for the rest of your life, what would it be?
That is that is a tough one.
It is.
Um, this is just to clarify here. Are we going to be able to survive for like
Yes,
indefinitely on this
this
food source?
this this
Okay,
food shall sustain until
okay,
death.
okay, okay. Um, in that case, I'm gonna go with bread. Um, there's just so many variations that you could make with bread. You can have sweet bread, sourdough.
Mm.
You put different herbs, different spices in it. You can change the texture. You can make it really buttery and smooth, like a croissant, or you can do all sorts of fun stuff with it. So
Croissant.
I'd go with bread.
Yeah. Nah, let's get this bread. Nah. For me, again, similar in terms of going for a staple food like you are, but for me, I'd have to go with chicken. Just all the different types you can. Like, you got Nando's chicken, which is goated, and you got
Yeah.
honey soy chicken, just like some grilled barbecue chicken, skewers, roast chicken. It's like, yeah,
2T chicken.
yes, the fried chicken, 2T fried chicken specifically, 2T. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, 2T is a Vietnamese cafe that's near ACU, which is where we study, and it's got some good food for some good prices.
If you ever find yourself in Fitzroy and you're walking along Gertrude Street, make sure to check it out because you won't regret it.
And this episode is not sponsored by 2T. I wish they would sponsor us. I advocate for them so much that really they should be reaching out to me, but maybe a future episode.
Give them time. Give them time.
Maybe if we'll see if this goes viral enough that they'll see it. But yeah, leave a comment. Hashtag 2T sponsor the Tris-Tan Podcast. Um, anyway, off after that tangent, that quick word from our sponsors. We're going to be getting into the topics now. Yeah, we'll start with, I guess, just do you have any general, like, sort of major thoughts on sort of any of the four topics of cancel culture, censorship, hate speech, or freedom of speech?
Um, not at the start. No, I think it'll more just be a case of I'll just take them one at a time as they come up.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, we'll just start with the first one then, I guess, cancel culture. Do you, actually, I might give just a brief explanation of what it is, just in case there are people who watching slash listening who don't know what it is. So for those who don't know, cancel culture is just basically, in the terms of the Western current times, it's just when someone does something or says something that the majority of the sort of crowd doesn't like, and they get sort of banned and taken off social media and just sort of blocked out of society. Would you describe it in any other way, Tom?
I mean, I guess I'd add that it also has a real world physical component to it.
Mm.
For many of them, they can't really show their face in public without
Yeah.
being vilified and scorned by others. So I guess I just add that extra
Yeah.
dimension to it.
Yeah, for sure.
Sometimes it can be relegated purely to social media, but very often it kind of bleeds out into the outer world.
Oh no, yeah, for sure. There's still that physical element, but yeah, obviously in the society we live in now, it's just a lot more technological. And yeah, like especially celebrities who get cancelled, it's especially their sort of social media influences taken off.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on cancel culture?
I mean, one thing that I think I've mentioned this before about cancel culture, but the underlying motivations behind it, at least in general, seem to be good. I'd say they seem, or at the very least, they seem to not have evil intent. At least the way that I've understood these motivations is that there's a group of people that notice some sort of wrongdoing, or at least a perceived wrongdoing, and action is not being taken by a higher power, such as, say, a government, to address that wrongdoing. So, just to give a hypothetical example, let's say someone is promoting racism, and they're just having zero consequences. They're just freely, publicly promoting it, and no one is stopping them. Then the motivation for cancel culture would be, okay, if nobody else is going to stop it, then we should do something about it. And so they step up and they try to reduce this person's influence. They try to reduce the spread of harmful information, of things that they reduce the spread of the thing that seems to be wrong. And so that sort of motivation, I'd say, is a good thing, because it's people taking a stand against what is wrong or what they perceive to be wrong. And there's nothing bad about that. Like, if anything, it's a fairly courageous and admirable thing to do. The difficulty, and I guess the flip side of cancel culture is that it's what you perceive to be wrong. not
Mm.
necessarily what is or isn't wrong. It's what you perceive as wrong that gets targeted and cancelled.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, like you said, it can be sort of perceived as a good thing, just fundamentally when describing it. But yeah, that key in what you were saying, I think for me is sort of what people perceive to be wrong. It's then just where do you get that definition of wrong? Where's the justification?
Yeah.
I think that's a very crucial thing because then really it just comes down to the society or like main wave of people sort of whatever they believe at the time is wrong is then created as wrong. It's sort of it's just relative um, to what the main crowd believes, and that
Yeah, because cancel culture normally only works if you have a large crowd feeling it. If it's just one
yeah
person, it doesn't really have as much impact. Then it's just like one person against the world. Really, it has to
yeah
be a majority honing in either on a minority or a single individual for it to really, I think, be cancel culture.
yeah for sure. But I think yeah, it's also just when it comes to that of sort of what people perceive to be wrong, it's sort of like they're just trying to play like God in that situation of setting the standard for what is wrong. Um, so that's like one of my issues with it, I guess, in the sense. Um, another one of the issues is that it sort of tears down people for making or like supposedly making wrong choices or having a wrong behavior. I say supposedly because I don't really agree with all the scenarios of which people have been cancelled, especially in current times. But yeah, so it sort of takes them for just that like wrong choice, wrong behavior, wrong thing they said, and just have destroyed them when without like sort of any mercy or grace being shown to them when especially every single person has done something wrong or made a mistake in their lives. So it's like almost I guess like hypocritical in the sense or sort of, like you can't really justify you making a mistake and not getting cancelled for it or doing something wrong in your life and not getting cancelled, but then someone else has made a mistake. It's like what then bases the value of like they're also judging sort of the value or weight of the
Yeah,
wrong as well. Which there are some wrongs which you can sort of judge like that's worse than this. Like, you know, murder is worse than telling a lie because
yeah,
you're taking someone's life. But yeah, just like that. That's also another thing I'd say that is a bit,
yeah,
yeah, a bit average for me.
yeah. And I think we feel that. Like you can feel the hypocrisy, especially to take a hypothetical situation again. If a politician comes into a press conference and says things like, "Oh, um, embezzling funds is bad. We must clamp down on corruption," but then you know that in order to get his position, he had to conduct shady deals with members of his party to get there.
Yeah.
You can feel like people react to that. They're kind of like, well, what is this? And it's a very common attitude that you see even in real life politics. Like politicians come across as hypocritical, and people don't respect that. People
Mm.
don't respect hypocrisy, and I think you're pointing out a very evident flaw in modern cancel culture, which is that the people that are doing the canceling have very often themselves done things that are worthy of being cancelled, that they are worthy of being cancelled for. Or at the very least, even if it's not worthy of being cancelled for, they've still committed wrongdoings of their own. So it's kind of a situation where it's like, why are you putting someone who has committed crimes of their own to judge the crimes of another? It's kind
Mm.
of as if it's as if if you're condemning a criminal, you get the members of a prison to decide on their sentence.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, for sure. Um. Yeah, like agreeing with like sort of I guess the politician hypothetical. Like, yeah, there's a lot of those situations where it's very hypocritical. But yeah, even just like you said, that metaphor of like the general population of the people in the prison judging another prisoner is exactly what it is. Because, yeah, like I said before, we've all done things wrong in our lives. And like, I also just want to even reference a Bible passage, which I guess you could link to this, is John chapter 8, verse 7, where there's the woman who's committed adultery, and I'm pretty sure it's the Pharisees who want to stone her. And then what Jesus does is he then says to them, let him who is without sin cast the first stone, which then none of them end up casting first stone because they're all sinful, just like all of us are sinful and everyone else is sinful. And really, in that case, Jesus was the only one who wasn't sinful. So if anyone had a right to cast stone, it was him, and he didn't, even in that case. So if he's not casting the stone in that case, then how much more are we like not meant to cast the stone? Like, sort of judge people for their wrongdoing when we have wrongdoing of our own.
Mm. I guess, I guess one potential response to that would be, well, sometimes we have to make judgments. Take
Mm,
again the form of criminals. Sometimes if someone commits a murder and you
mm.
don't do anything, then what's to stop them from just continuing to murder?
Yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, obviously, yeah, the justice system is there for a reason. Like, it's been appointed so that they can, like, again, some justice systems are a bit corrupt, but for the most part, it's there, like, as an institution so that those who have done wrong under the law can be sort of punished or judged accordingly. Um, but yeah, I think the thing that um, yeah, sort of Jesus was talking about in that passage was just, you know, if someone has done something wrong, like, we shouldn't be too quick to sort of jump down their throats because we ourselves have also done wrong things. Obviously, there are still times when like, you see someone doing something wrong and you can call them out on it, but I think you still need to do it in a loving way
Mm.
rather than coming from oh, you're so bad, you're so evil, like how could
Yeah,
you stuff
you
up like
can't you
that?
can't you can't approach from a position of moral superiority.
Yeah, yeah, like I said, like we do things wrong ourselves. And yeah, ultimately where I get my sense of, right and wrong in the world just comes from, I guess, the Bible, from God's law. Now, as a Christian, I'm not called to, judge people. God is the ultimate judge. But using the Bible and the law, I can lovingly call people out in their sin, but while also being very critical and reflective on my own sin, to
Mm.
not be hypocritical in calling someone else out for something when I do that exact same thing. Now, yeah, that is a fine line and a very hard thing to balance, but it's just something you've got to be aware of at the end of the day.
Yeah, we've all got to try to sort of
Mm.
improve ourselves and keep ourselves right before God. Um, but again, it's not something that I think we can do alone. It might certainly be possible to do that alone, but I don't think that's possible for the majority of people. And that's where I think the role of having a community that supports you in that endeavor, and which you support the other people in the community in that same endeavor, really comes from. And I guess that sort of can be linked to your idea of, being critical of your own sins, but also not being afraid to call out the sins of others.
Yeah, and I think like it also comes down to, but getting back onto sort of cancel culture, it's sort of removing an element of like people being able to redeem themselves, like to have that sort of
Mhm.
redemption. Like
Yeah,
like when someone does something wrong and sort of the whole world turns their back on them, it's not really gonna help them. Like
yeah,
You want to
Cancel
sort of
culture isn't.
support them.
Sorry, I'll let you
Oh,
finish.
I was just going to say, you want to sort of support them when they're at the
Mm,
lowest moment. Again, it depends on the situation. There's some people that are cancelled for very different things, but yeah.
yeah. I mean, the other thing about cancel culture is that it's essentially a form of exile, and exile historically was a final punishment. You isolate the individual from the community, and the
Mm,
individual alone would 9 times out of 10 perish.
mm,
Um, you know, exile wasn't offered as it wasn't offered with any intention of redemption or like or reconciliation. It was a final judgment, and cancel culture certainly seems to also be a kind of final judgment. There isn't really any room in the process for people to redeem themselves.
mm. Yeah, exactly. And it sort of lacks, as in cancel culture, it sort of lacks that ability to forgive people for wrongs they've done. Now, there are going to be some wrongs that people do that are going to be hard to forgive. But again, as a Christian, I'm called to forgive people for wrongs they do against me, no matter what. Um, Again, that's a hard thing to do. I'm not saying I'm perfect at that. I'm definitely nowhere near perfect at that. Um, but at the end of the day, there's that comfort in knowing that God is a just God and He won't let sin go unpunished. Now, when it comes down to it, I myself am a sinner, but it's because of obviously leaning on the sacrifice of Jesus who died on the cross for everyone's sins, that trusting in him and following him and committing my life to him, he then has given me access through his death and resurrection. Um, that when God looks at my sort of rap sheet, he sees Jesus' righteousness instead of my sins. Now, if someone wrongs me and I forgive them, knowing that if anything's going to happen to them, it'll come through God who does say like vengeance is mine. Um, but at the end of the day, it might not be the case because if that person does also then sort of turn their life around and give it to God, then like yeah, like it's sort of that's why forgiveness is a key thing because like you never know where someone's going to end up in their life or how they're going to turn their lives
Mm.
around. Like yeah, I'm sort of rambling on now, so I'll stop.
No, no, that was actually wonderful. You made some really insightful points that I think we can all take something relevant away from that.
um, Anything else on cancer culture that you sort of wanted to discuss?
Um, no, I think we've given it a fairly nice overview. I've got nothing
Mm.
more to add.
I guess the last thing I'll say is um, on sort of Jesus dying on the cross for sins. He to pay everyone's sins, he created himself a different type of cancer culture, which was canceling the people's sins who believe in him and turn to him. Um, I guess actually before we finish up on cancer culture, I also wanted to talk about just even some examples of people who have been cancelled. I guess in recent times as well. Um, so I guess a few of them would be, Jordan Peterson is one that comes to mind. I don't know. Oh, I guess like Andrew Tate is also one. I don't know if you'd classify Trump. I guess the community sort of tries to cancel him, but it's kind of
I
hard
mean,
to.
like he got his account revoked, so I guess that's a
Yeah,
flaw in
I guess
translation.
that links more to censorship. So I guess yeah, I'll bring
Oh,
this topic up now that so we can have that bridging to censorship as well. But like even all so those three examples, I guess I don't think any of those three deserved to be cancelled. I'm not saying that they're perfect, they did nothing wrong, or I agree with all their views. I'm not saying that, but like there are much worse people out there that if I did believe in cancel culture, that I think, would be more worthy of being cancelled. But
Mm,
yeah, I don't think they even did anything completely wrong, which I guess shows
yeah,
the flaws of cancel culture, of
yeah,
how it just does depend on the group of people.
yeah. I guess what you're saying is then is that you feel that by focusing on these individuals, we're kind of focusing our efforts on the wrong people. Then.
Yeah, like again, it comes down to subjectiveness on what's right and what's wrong of the society at the time. Like Jordan Peterson, I think makes some very good. I guess he does some very good work in terms of working with. I guess even the younger generation. Sort of helping them through their sort of like troubles or things they may be going through. And he does have some very insightful things that he says. Like he's a very, I guess, well articulated person. So like I was
Mm,
kind of shocked when he actually did get cancelled, because I just thought he was such a soft and well articulated guy, and he just would genuinely seem like a kind guy. Again, I haven't
mm,
met him. I can't. I don't know him personally, so I can't fully advocate for that. Yeah, and then I guess in the case of Andrew Tate, I see why people could hate him. Like, he said some borderline, questionable things that social media easily turned and twisted into, so like, him being misogynistic. And he does have a very prideful and arrogant approach. But I do think some of the things you're saying, especially about mental health, were very insightful, in terms of, oh, like not mental, more so like I guess depression, um,
mm,
and sort of getting off your like technology, going exercising. Like I think
mm,
all those things were very insightful, and sort of just not not getting knocked down, like keep fighting, sort of that sort of mentality, striving on in life. Um,
mm.
yeah. Did you have anything on those two people?
Um, I, I, I would just preface by saying that I don't have enough information regarding either Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate to say whether I think they should or shouldn't be cancelled. I simply don't know enough.
Hmm.
I'm simply not as exposed to their content. I don't have enough of a basis to work on. Um, One thing I would say about Peterson, however, which always struck me, is that, as you mentioned, he's a very accomplished public speaker. His
Hmm.
manner of communicating points is very articulate, and a lot of his insights on psychology specifically, because the man works in the psychological field. A lot of those insights, especially in terms of like religious narratives, were extremely interesting and very educative. As for some of the other um, issues that people have with him, again, I don't have enough knowledge on what he has or has not done, so I make no judgments in this case. I'm not qualified
Hmm.
to make any firm statements.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
And one more
Okay.
thing I should say, regarding your points on depression, I would add a caveat saying that I think the idea of like exercising and getting off the computer and touching grass, as they like to say, that doesn't necessarily solve. If you actually have a clinical depression, touching grass won't fix it. But what it does, I think, is that it puts you in a state where you can work towards recovery and you can work towards a better outcome.
Hmm.
So, but again, like you can't, you've got to walk before you can run.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's kind of like the walking stage. Like those are the first things that you can do.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
that's I think where the influence of exercise and that sort of thing comes when dealing with mental health issues.
Mm. Yeah, I'm not saying that like, all cases of depression, like there's certain situations that go on in people's lives, but the general sort
Yeah.
of unhappiness that's sort of generated in today's sort of generation is, I'd argue, caused from technology, social media. Um,
Mm.
and look, it's even become pretty hard, like when it comes to determining depression, it's like it's hard to do because yeah, yeah,
it's a very complex science, and
yeah,
even that science is changing quite rapidly. So it's actually you are correct. It's very
yeah.
difficult sort
It's
of
very sort of,
field to work within.
yeah, grey area sort of thing to sort of talk about. But yeah, and then I guess sort of now continuing on to sort of the last one of Trump. Look, mate, a lot of these things I'm saying is probably going to get this podcast cancelled. But anyway, the thing is with Trump, like when you look at it, he was exposing sort of, the lies of a lot of major sort of powers in the world, and then also like he couldn't be bought out because he was already a well-established businessman with billions of dollars. And when you see his net worth over his presidency, he actually lost $2 billion, which think goes to show that fact that he couldn't be bought out. Um, and the media just loved to try spinning some of the things he said. Like one time he literally was talking about like illegal immigrants from like sort of gangs that were coming across the border and murdering people. And then he called them, animals because of what they were doing, which then the social media twisted to saying that he called all immigrants animals, which it's crazy to see like how easy it is to social media can have an effect on people's viewpoints of characters.
Mm.
But I think like overall, what he did put America first, like his nation first, and I think that's why he was a good president. But yeah, again, he got his Twitter account banned, and this was at a time when the Taliban in Afghanistan had a Twitter account. So it's like I don't get how that works.
Yeah.
This is one man, Trump, is as worse as a terrorist group.
Mm.
And the whole point they banned his Twitter account was because he supposedly was inciting the riot that started after he lost the election on the um in 2020, which he actually posted on Twitter saying for people to either protest peacefully or go home. And
Mm.
the thing is that that post was removed, so it was also kind of questionable. But yeah,
I would say on Trump again, like with like with I nearly said
Andrew
Andrew
Peterson.
Peterson, like with Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate. I don't know enough about Trump to be able to make any valid
Yeah.
judgments on whether he should or shouldn't be cancelled. I would say though that Trump has, well, he had and continues to have a very, very large amount of support within the American population. And so, and that often, it, I was talking to someone recently about how Trump, had so much support now and how, he became president and so many people voted for him. And this person was very anti-Trump, but they were saying, oh, Trump's a bad person and he's like, corrupt and evil. And I said, okay, look, those may be valid points, but how do we explain the millions of people that voted for him? And their response was, oh, they're just southern states. They're all really stupid. And that kind of made me think because I said, these are millions of people. Now, yeah, sure, maybe on average, you could argue, oh, the southern states on average might score lower on IQ tests than the average person from the northern states. Like maybe you can make that point. However, the idea that millions of people are all just corrupt and evil and are just bigoted and supporting this white supremacist guy, it strikes me as a little too simplistic. It seems a little too easy, um, because life is often far more nuanced, and the the unmitigated hatred towards Trump tends to also get expressed as a demonization of those who support him. And I think that's only going to make them dig in their heels further and say, look, we were right in supporting Trump because he's combating this. And
Mm.
so when we demonize the other, that will just that will just turn them into exactly what we want them to be.
Mm.
We're just turning them into our own enemies. So I
Mm.
think that there's, and like the amount of disconnect between people that support Trump and people that don't, it's very worrying, honestly, because unless we learn to sort of engage in respectful dialogue with each other, and unless we're able to share views without immediately sort of attacking the other person, we're never really going to be able to get anywhere.
Mm. And I guess that sort of links back to what we were talking about in the first episode of the podcast. But yeah, I think like yeah, what you were saying, I guess that's why I was sort of hesitant to say Trump being cancelled because he does still have a lot of support.
Yeah,
So that he sort of hasn't been. But like also the media loves him. Like they love putting clips up of
it's
him.
like he's cancelled by one like area of the population, but the other area of the population has sort of embraced him.
Yeah, but look, I will say he's not. He's a very explosive kind of personality, like in the way he talks. But like all these claims that he's racist or like all these claims against him, I don't agree. I just think people are throwing around these words. I haven't seen any evidence for it. Again, I could be talking on like Trump, Biden, American politics for hours. So
Yeah,
I'll pull
yeah,
myself back a little. But I
yeah.
do, I do want to see a combined photo of Andrew Peterson, just like a merged image of Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson. That's all I'm saying. That someone's gonna make that happen.
That would be hilarious.
That'd be great. Uh, Anyway, we'll move into sort of now more focused on censorship. Um, Thoughts on it? Like, I guess like social media censorship, more so is what
Mm,
we're focusing on, I guess, to be more
yeah,
relevant. Um,
yeah. Well, I know that we're focused on social media censorship, but I'm going to just take a step back for a second. I feel like censorship more broadly, at least the way that I see it, is it's an attempt to preserve society. Um, you you restrict things, you remove things, or you make it difficult to access things that could be detrimental to social well-being. You know, you don't show young children movies that are R18 rated or MA15 rated, even though lots of people still end up seeing these things.
yeah.
I mean, I saw my first MA movie when I was less than 15, so it's like, you know, just goes to show. But we put these sort of rules in place to prevent um, that sort of social that lack of social cohesion. And I guess you could, and I guess the other side is also, especially if we're taking examples like the Comstock laws, which I could go on for ages about, so I'm not going to go too deep into them. But that was more to prevent degeneracy, as he saw it. So
Mm,
there's, which again, degeneracy would lead to a lack of social cohesion. So I guess it all sort of links back around that sort of main idea of maintaining social cohesion, maintaining social unity, and preventing um, splintering of the society and sort of it breaking apart.
mm. Yeah, I think I would agree with you fundamentally, sort of on that sort of explanation on censorship there. Especially like when it comes to things like like you said, like guidances on movie like ratings and like TV shows, like what age group are they best suited for, um,
Mm,
and even just like when it comes to like pre-recorded shows where they have certain language just being like bleeped out again, that's
mm,
fine,
yeah.
no issues there. I think it more so then comes down to the social media aspect of censorship
Mm,
for me, which I tend to sort of start to have a bit of an issue with. Like, I think it again comes down to sort of that similar point of cancel culture where these social media platforms then have the sort of control on what gets to be like sort of shown slash said, and what doesn't get to be said. And I think that's when, yeah, that's where again I have the issue with it, especially like Twitter pre Elon Musk owning it. It was very renowned for like having a lot of censorship on it. Yeah,
I would have put out Twitter was also renowned for having a lot of disgusting things on it as well.
yeah,
So
sure. I can agree with that, but I think like when it came to just people expressing their views or opinions on certain things, and then just getting censored, it's like a bit like concerning in that aspect for me.
Mm.
Like, it sort of removes the ability for people to have their own, like, voice their own opinions on certain issues in the world. Um,
Mm.
even if it might not be like, oh yeah, not 9 times out of 10 they're getting censored because it's not the popular opinion of the world.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and like,
But I mean, we should
right,
keep in mind, though, even censorship on a broader level mirrors the sort of popular opinions. I'm going to bring up
yeah,
Comstock yet again. I mean, you know, there was all these. In my opinion, while the intention may have been good, they were pretty overboard on the laws that were implemented. And then, a generation later, people revoked them. They said,
mm,
these aren't necessary, these aren't helpful. Even within the last 30, 40 years, what was acceptable in a film 50 years ago is different from what's acceptable now. You can say different things. You can't say certain other things. So censorship always reflects the society of the day. It's never
yeah,
just a one size fits all.
mm, yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, and I guess like even just like it's not really censorship, but like even some of the warnings that just comes up on like Instagram, Facebook posts, like about certain
Mm.
issues, just sort of I guess this idea of sort of trying to discredit sort of views or opinions that you know majority of the population don't agree with.
I assume you're referring to the warnings on, say, contentious topics online. So, warning this post like
Yeah,
contains like triggering
you
material.
know like the like COVID or the vaccines or climate change, just sort of those sort of
Mm.
topics. But then there's just the general warning of like this could be misinformation or something. Like
Yeah,
just
yeah.
I guess those warnings again, like sure I understand there's gonna be um opinions that aren't really backed up with any fact or evidence, but you're
Mm.
gonna get that on both sides. And when you see
Yeah.
these warnings, they tend to be on the one side only, like of
Mm.
people with the certain opinion on those. So
Yeah.
I think that's also an issue for me.
Yeah. You don't see anybody like advocating for sustainability. You don't see their posts being slammed with trigger warnings.
Yeah, like oh, again, look,
Although arguably, I would say that like I don't think that those sort of posts should get trigger warnings because sustainability
sustainability
is
is not
important.
not necessarily wrong. It's just more
Yeah.
so again, it comes down to the aspect of what do you consider sustainable and how far are you willing to sort
Mm.
of go with like look, I'll try to say it, but more so like the taxes that come from the government when it comes to climate change. Like
Mm.
I don't really agree with that. Again, look, I'll try to quickly summarize my view on climate change is that I don't believe the world's just gonna sort of start flooding and whatnot. Like scientists have been saying that the world was going to be flooding because of climate change in the 1990s. Then they said it was going to be like 2010s and then 2020s, and now it's like 2050. It just keeps changing. It's sort of
Mm.
like their supposed climate. Um, which again, climate does change from day to day. Not disagreeing there. But I think also just the fact, as a Christian with my faith in God, He does write after the flood that, um, like the earth shall not cease, and so
I mean, I would point out that though, climate change is a lot of climate change doesn't necessarily destroy the world. It just
no,
destroys humans. Like
yeah,
the world itself is is going to be is going to more or less exist. There might not be trees, but it's still the planet will still be there. It's the humans that are going to suffer.
yeah, but again, when it comes down to as a Christian, when Jesus returns, He's not going to come back to an empty world of no humans. But look, again, that just comes down to my faith. So at the end of the day, I'm chalking it up just to that. Like, when it comes to my faith, it gives me no worry or fears about climate change, but also just some of the scientific evidence for it. There's a lot of scientists that discredit it, and there's a lot of scientists that approve it. And so it's very 50-50 split, and they've been very, like, their predictions have not been correct so far. So it's like, again, that's why where I've got my sense. Anyway, I could talk about this again for hours. So we're going to keep going. And again, that's probably going to get me cancelled. Anyway, yeah. Anything else on censorship?
Um, yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm sure I already mentioned this, but it really does just come down to the narrative,
Mm.
which I guess which can be linked to cancel culture. Like with cancel culture, it's what is the narrative of what's acceptable. If it goes against the narrative, you cancel it. Censorship, what presents what goes against that social narrative, and if it if it could damage that narrative, if it could damage the society, then you take steps to prevent that. Like
Yeah.
cancel culture and censorship is both just taking steps to prevent a
Mm.
perceived wrong
Yeah.
or a perceived danger.
Yeah. I just think the issue with it is that they've both sort of just become a bit more subjective and opinionated and warped over the years.
Mm.
But again, I've presented my issues with them.
I mean, the other thing with censorship, though, is that especially with social media censorship, as you pointed out, is that while most censorship is conducted for the preservation of a specific society or a specific set of ideals, social media is global.
Mm.
Um, and the global society, it's a very abstract concept. It's a very, I think, there is certainly is sort of like a global society, but it operates on a much more abstract level. Whereas whereas um, national societies, the societies that you live in, say Australia, India, China, America, whichever country you live in, those also have a very, very strong prevalence. But with social media censorship, you've got these corporations that aren't censoring necessarily for the good of society. They're censoring for the good of their platforms.
Mm.
And these platforms, they're a business. And businesses work for profit. So you're censoring for the good of what makes the most profit, not
Mm.
for the good of the society. And so there's that difference in motivation, which I think would very much influence what gets censored and for what reasons.
Mm. Yeah, for sure, for sure. We'll move on to now. I guess we'll leave freedom of speech for last. We'll talk about, I guess, the so-called hate speech now.
Mm.
Yeah, thoughts on it? Initial thoughts?
My initial thoughts, I just said that hate speech is really just it's a label,
Mm.
first and foremost, and it's a label for um, acts of speech which you perceive to be spoken with malicious intent, with intent to harm.
Mm.
Um, yeah, that's my initial thoughts, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think the issue then comes down to, how can you tell the intent of an individual? What do you then classify as speech that's harmful or sort of hurtful to
Mm.
you? Like, because nowadays people get offended just when you say your opinion on something. You're
Mm.
not even attacking the character of the person or anything. You're just giving an opinion, and they'll find that as hurtful. So again, that comes down to that. Really, yeah, there's just a lot of factors that come into it, and like you said, it's a label that just likes to get thrown around nowadays.
Yeah, it's a very popular sort of buzzword, and it's very easy to use it. But
Mm.
I think I feel like by using it so often, we've it's we've diluted it.
Mm.
It's lost the meaning and the impact I think it should have. Because
Mm.
hate speech should be something that we take seriously. But now it's kind of, and even this is and this happened to me as well. Like, if you read an article on hate speech, you're just like, oh, okay, oh well, they're whatever, they're probably wrong. Maybe they're right, but you hear it, you just become desensitized to it, and by being
Mm.
too free with what we classify as hateful, we've kind of just made everything hateful. And when everything is hateful, then nothing's really hateful anymore.
Yeah, and the thing is, hate is a very strong word, and yeah, that just applying that to everything will then just make it lose that sort of, like you said, that strength and impact that it does have. Um, but again, I think it even links back to sort of what we were talking about last week, even with the just when you're having a conversation or discussion about sensitive topics, people find like to throw the term around of hate speech when you're just sort of having a different opinion or disagreeing with one of their opinions. Like it's a very like the way they use the word is very like sort of strange, I guess, in a way.
Mm,
Especially because they use it so much. But the thing is, when it comes down to the word, like I said before, you can't tell the intent of someone. And
mm,
when, especially in those discussions and debates, when um, you're having different opposing views, I said this last week, but like generally, that should be a sign of respect being shown to each other, that you're taking the time to have a conversation, an exchange of sort of thoughts and opinions. As long as obviously it's done in a respectful manner in terms of the way you're speaking to another. Obviously, you can get a bit heated sometimes, but like as long as you don't
mm.
make it sort of personal. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think hate speech has sort of contributed. Oh, the term, sorry, hate speech has contributed to destroying that sort of
Mm.
view of it being a respectful, like sign of respect to have those conversations of disagreeing views.
I mean, hate speech, like the label, what you accuse someone of committing hate speech, it also works to dehumanize them
Mm,
because now they're not showing respect in their words, and maybe they're not. Like maybe they are being legitimately hateful. But then I feel what often happens is that it becomes the case of, oh, if they're committing hate speech and they're not showing respect, then we don't have to show respect. We don't have to. We don't need to engage with them
mm,
on a level of respect and love anymore. We can brush them aside. They've lost the right to have any relevance. And when you start to think like that, you open the door for a lot of very dangerous actions. And again, that's what and it links back to how when we use the word hate speech so often, then everybody sort of becomes sort of dehumanized. Then you don't need to listen to them anymore. You can
mm.
just sort of maintain your own views, irrespective of what they do, because they are hateful and they've lost the right to sort of be engaged with on the same level.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think I find it especially kind of funny when um people are saying like a Christian is that like sort of saying like being having hate speech or being hateful in their what they're talking about, because if they are genuinely a Christian, then they're called to love everyone, including their enemies, which just shows how like that includes everyone. Um, and sure, like we're still humans as Christians, we still stuff up, we still make mistakes, but generally speaking, um, yeah, like they call the opinions of Christians to be hateful when really we get our opinions is really just God's word. Like as a Christian, that's really what it should be. Um, it should be our opinion should be based on God's word. It should have sort of that biblical foundation. Um, and so really they're just like Christ puts it well in John when he says the world hates you because it hated me first. So like when they're calling Christians
Yeah, which
hateful,
makes sense because
yeah,
Christianity, like the values that Christianity preaches, are inherently opposed to the values
yeah,
of the world.
yeah,
And in fact, I'd argue that I mean, it's always been that way. Even in periods of history where Christianity has remained a dominant cultural force, even the values of those times have often stood in direct contradiction with many elements of Christian teaching.
mm,
There's always been a level of contradiction, and it's somewhat understandable why there'd be so much hostility towards that.
mm, yeah. Yeah, but yeah, I guess the world loves to pick and choose sort of the morals and teachings from the Bible they like, and then just disregard the ones they
Yeah,
don't like. They like to just pick and choose in that sense, I guess.
yeah, and
But
Christians have done that too very often. We
Yeah,
can't just blame the world exclusively for that.
yeah, sure. There's certainly, as Christians, it can be sort of, if we're not careful and we don't examine or we don't have that regard for the Bible, we can easily fall into that, I guess, in some extent.
I mean, I know I'm definitely guilty of that multiple times.
Mm,
I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, we must be careful of not doing this thing when I've done that multiple times myself. It's not
yeah.
it's not something that we can. It's not something that comes easily.
Yeah, again, just to
We
clarify,
just,
sort of, we're both we're talking about these things, but a lot of things we're saying, we're not saying we're perfect in really either. Like, or we're not saying
mm,
we're like, like we were saying earlier, we're not saying we have moral superiority or anything.
mm,
It's, we're just two guys in our rooms online talking about these topics. Like,
yeah,
what gives us credit? Like, really, this is just uh,
yeah,
like we're just having an enjoyable
yeah.
discussion, I guess.
We've not set out, or at least I know that I'm sure you haven't as well. We've not
Um,
set out to. We've not come here to sort of say this is what you have to be doing. Our opinions are super important, and you're
no.
going to have to listen to them. Um, that's not the intention behind this. I personally have always seen this as an opportunity to engage in discussions that we might not otherwise have,
Mm,
and B, for whoever's listening, to encourage them to also consider different ideas and opinions, to also engage with topics that they might not otherwise have engaged with, and make their own conclusions, not necessarily just to, you know, take what Tom said, take what Tristan said,
mm,
and just say, this is now what I think. No, you should be able to make your own opinions. But
yeah.
hopefully by listening to this, by listening to other things as well, you can be able to you'll be it will
It sort of,
inspire you to be able to make those
yeah,
opinions of your
yeah,
own.
like prompt those thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll quickly get into freedom of speech now. So, of all those things we've sort of spoken about, how do you think freedom of speech in our society falls into those? Like, do you think it can exist, or is it like sort of something that's just
Well,
like a term that people like to use?
yeah. All societies, I'd say, and all systems have a level of inherent contradictions.
Hmm.
Um, they will promote one thing and then they will result in something else.
Yeah.
Um, so, freedom of speech on the surface seems to be a in direct contradiction with hate speech. How can you be free to say what you want, but then how can you be stopped from saying what you want at the same time? I guess
Hmm.
I forget who said this. If anyone out there knows who said it, please feel free to put in the comments or something, or let us know. But there's a quote that goes, "The right to swing my fist ends where the other man's nose begins." And
Hmm.
I think that that's perhaps one of the most concise ways to distinguish between freedom of speech and hate speech is that you say you do what you desire until it until it harms the other.
Hmm.
The difficulty, I guess, with it becomes, what constitutes harm
Yeah.
and what constitutes offense. What constitutes when do you have the right to be offended?
Hmm.
I mean, that's a whole topic you could go into for an hour all by itself. Um, there's entire essays and video essays dedicated to just the topic of when do you have the right to be offended. But I'd say that's where I think freedom of speech fits into this. I mean, and even cancel culture, like the people that are doing the canceling, they're expressing their freedom of speech, the freedom to cancel someone else. So that's just an interesting sort of stance to take on it.
I think it's a bit more than freedom of speech. I think there's a few other things going ahead. But look,
Okay, yeah, no, fair enough.
they have
Fair
that
enough.
freedom of speech to say that they don't think that person is right. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
believe it was. Again, I'm not quite sure who said this quote again, but it was. I think it was all people are free, but some are more free than others.
mm,
Um, you never actually have a completely equal level of freedom. I think in any society, the closest thing to it would be anarchy. And even in complete anarchy, you end up with imbalances of freedom.
Mm.
So I think pure freedom of speech is ultimately impossible.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's a good thing. You could argue that pure freedom of speech could actually be very dangerous.
Yeah. I think I do completely agree with sort of that quote you said about sort of, the freedom of the sort of fist ends with the where the other person's
Yeah.
nose starts. Yeah. And I agree again, it's hard to tell, what the harm or what is offensive. It's sort of hard to judge those, but yeah, it's just I don't think the freedom of speech that a lot of people claim is deserving in sort of the society we live in. A lot of those people that claim that are also people that support sort of these like censorship, cancel culture, or throw around hate speech. Yeah, so I think that in itself is a bit contradictory, but yeah, again, it's a pretty difficult thing to um, sort of have because again, like you said, there are certain things which, like when you're verbally abusing someone, that should not be allowed in any situation. Um, and there's some cases where it's very obvious when it's verbal abuse and whatnot, but then there's other cases where it's just like there could be,
It can be much more subtle than that. It can be
yeah,
very subtle.
yeah,
But that's not to discount the importance of freedom of speech, because if you don't have that,
mm,
you just have complete censorship, and then that
yeah,
just becomes very easy for one person or a group of people to just control a much larger population through that.
mm, yeah, for
Like the
sure,
most effective way to control a large population, or one of the most effective ways, of controlling and maintaining control, is to restrict what can and can't be said to within a certain category which you define as appropriate.
mm, yeah, for sure, for sure. Did you have any sort of concluding thoughts on freedom of speech before we just sort of wrap up?
Um, I guess just to, I guess I'd just say that it's a very nuanced topic. Um, it's very complex. A lot of it's very abstract and all theory and idea, but then it ends up having very real consequences. So I'd just say that we haven't given it like a comprehensive um sort of description or examination, but that wasn't the
Mm,
point. So
yeah,
yeah, I just say that what we've said here isn't like the be all and end all on free speech. There's a lot
no.
more to it
We
than
haven't
just this.
unpacked it as much as we could have. More so
Yeah.
for time reasons, but yeah, I guess I'll leave it on this joke. So just sort of on the topic of people finding certain speech harmful or offensive. So the other day I saw a couple guys taking a gate from someone's house. I was gonna say something to them, but I was worried they might take offense. Anyway, um, if you want there to be sort of a joke of the podcast each episode, let me know. Leave it in the comments. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, we'll sort of conclude there. We've had some very deep and interesting topics and some very confronting conversations today. Um, if you were sort of confronted or found something challenging or difficult about what we were saying, please do let us know. Like either leave in the comments or just come, talk to us or message us privately. We don't. The intention of this isn't to sort of, I guess, bring that sort of confrontational aspect to sort of the people
Yeah.
that watch us listen to this. It's more so,
Yeah.
like you said, we want to have a discussion where it's sort of, talking about those deeper conversations where people, we have our own opinions and can
Yeah.
bring them to light and sort of prompt that thought. So yeah, please do know that, yeah, our intention isn't to, yeah, be hurtful in any way. But do let us know if you're struggling with something. Don't just hold it in. It would be appreciated.
Mm.
Um, other than that, did you have anything else to add, Tom?
No, again, I just reiterate what you said. If anything here has hurt you in some way, or if you feel we could have addressed something better, please do let us know. It really, we would appreciate it. And we, again, we don't do this with the intention of causing harm or to pretend that we're somehow better or more insightful or important than everyone else. It's just to have these conversations for the sake of them, and then to hopefully inspire other people to consider these things for themselves, make their own conclusions. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Other than that though, if you like the video, leave a like. If you have any topics or conversations you want me to sort of bring up on following episodes, leave a comment. If you have any questions you want me to ask as well in future episodes at the start, just also leave a comment about that. Otherwise,
Any jokes for Tristan to say, leave a comment.
any intro questions, yes, they can be as simple or crazy as you want them. Maybe not as crazy. We'll see. I'm gonna censorship there. Other than that, if you found anything interesting or something that just stood out to you, let us know. Leave a comment. But yeah, hopefully we'll have a second episode coming out soon. Thanks everyone.
A third
sorry,
episode.
third. Sorry. I didn't think we were going to make it to a second episode. I thought we were going to be cancelled by then. But anyway, yeah, thanks again, Tom, for joining me for the second episode. We'll have you back soon again, I'm sure.
Can't wait. Cannot wait. Cannot wait.
Mate, the fans love you. You're the top guest at the moment.
Yeah, I wonder why.
But yeah, thanks everyone for watching / listening. Yeah, we'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.